Today, we are going way back in time, to the smoke-filled, bustling streets of 19th century Leeds. We're going to uncover a true crime story that's been all but forgotten. This is the case of Anne Barber, a woman whose crime was judged by a law so bizarre, so archaic, it's honestly hard to believe it was ever real.
Just think about that for a second. It's a shocking question, isn't it? But for a woman back in the early 1800s, the answer was a terrifying yes. Killing your husband wasn't just murder. Oh no. It was seen as an act of treason against the head of your own household. And this one single, crazy law is the absolute key to understanding the story we're about to dive into. And our story unfolds right here, in Leeds, which at the time was an absolute powerhouse of the Industrial Revolution. Its main street, Briggate, was just buzzing with energy, new money, and new construction. But underneath all that shiny, prosperous surface, a much, much darker story was playing out.
Yeah, because for all of its growth and all its grandeur, Victorian Leeds was a city of really stark, brutal contrasts.
You really had two completely different cities smashed into one. On one side, you had this immense, unprecedented wealth, with businessmen showing off their money by putting up these grand new buildings. But on the other side, well, that was the grim reality for the thousands who flocked to the city for work, crushing poverty, living crammed into these awful slums where violence was just a part of daily life.
And just to give you an idea of how grim we're talking, in 1849, a single cholera outbreak, which spread like wildfire through those unsanitary slums, killed over 2,000 people. This was the world that many people lived in, and it's in this world of crime and poverty that our story is set. So, how did a city like this deal with all that crime? Well, let's take a quick look at the justice system they had back then.
Okay, so if you were accused of a serious crime, the path was pretty clear-cut. It would all start at the coroner's court, just to figure out the cause of death. Then you'd head to the magistrate's court for an initial trial. But for the really serious stuff, like murder, you were sent to the assizes, these higher courts at your castle, to face your final verdict. And for anyone found guilty and sentenced to death, the final stop was a place like this, Armley Jail. It was described as a grim, foreboding place, and this is where hangings were carried out. The body would be left hanging for a full hour before being cut down and buried in an unmarked grave, right there, within the prison walls. What a truly bleak end.
Okay, so now we get to the absolute heart of this case. This very specific legal concept that could turn a domestic murder into an act against the state itself.
The crime was called petite treason. Now, petite just means small, right? That was to distinguish it from high treason, which was a crime against the king or queen. See, the law saw the husband as the master of the household, his own little kingdom. So a wife killing him, well, that was basically seen as the same as a subject killing their king. Before the 1790s, the punishment could even be being burned at the stake. It was a law built entirely on this one idea, that a man's life was just fundamentally more valuable than a woman's.
And this is where Anne Barber comes in. At 44 years old, she found herself facing not just a regular murder charge, but this ancient, terrifying charge of petite treason. The system was so determined to convict her, they actually charged her with both, just to make sure one of them stuck.
So what on earth did Anne Barber do to find herself in this awful position? Let's break down the actual case.
The whole story kicks off in late 1820. Anne, who was married to a man named James, ran off with their lodger, a younger man named William Thompson. But the social pressure from their neighbors, who were absolutely horrified by the affair, was so intense that Thompson was forced to move out just 2 months later. And then, the very next month, on March 17th, Anne served her husband a roasted apple that she had laced with arsenic. He died in agony the next morning, and almost immediately she confessed to the son of the local constable, supposedly telling him she was just tired of her husband. The path from that crime to her conviction was just shockingly fast.
You can just imagine, this thing became a huge local sensation. The newspapers went wild, describing how the enormity of the crime excited an unusual degree of interest. The courtroom was apparently packed to the rafters, especially with women, all of them eager to get a look at the person who had done something so shocking.
And when it came to the trial, well, it was pretty much a slam dunk. The evidence, which included her own confession and testimony from the druggist who sold her the arsenic, was just overwhelming. The judge, a Mr. Justice Holroyd, left absolutely no room for doubt. To him and to that jury, her guilt was absolute.
So the verdict was in, the sentence was passed, and all that was left was the final public act of justice.
And this was the sight.
The execution was set for Monday, August 13, 1821, at what was called the New Drop behind York Castle. You have to remember, public executions back then were designed to be a spectacle, a really grim warning to everyone who came to watch.
And in her final hours, any tiny sliver of doubt about her guilt was completely erased. In a late-night conversation with a wardress, Anne confessed everything. She even admitted that she tried to poison her husband once before the fatal dose.
But any sense of calm or resolve she might have had just completely crumbled when the sentence was read. As the judge put on that black cap, the sign for the death penalty, Anne apparently shrieked and collapsed right there on the floor. As she was being removed from the court, she grabbed a wardress and just pleaded, desperately, "Oh, save me, save me." But after the hanging, her punishment still wasn't over. As was pretty common for notorious criminals, her body was sent to the Leeds General Infirmary for a public dissection, a final indignity. But even before that, they laid her body out for public viewing, and a huge crowd, mostly women again, flocked to see the body of the infamous murderer.
The case of Anne Barber is just such a chilling window into another world, a time of these deep social divides and laws like petty treason that showed just how unequal that society was. Now, while Anne was almost certainly guilty of murder, it's the way she was charged and punished that really makes you stop and think. Because when you look back at a justice system that seems so alien to us, it's impossible not to wonder, what parts of our own system will seem just as strange or maybe even as barbaric to the people who look back on us one day?